right, folks, welcome back to According to Sam. This is episode 391. Thank you for joining me today. Got a great podcast for you. We're going to pick up where we left off in the last podcast, and I have a lot to share with you guys. Probably not going to finish and get to everything that I want to say in this podcast and want to cover, but we'll probably pick it back up again on Monday. I mean, it is running with the same theme that we've been running with and talking about for weeks now, months, talking about Jewish history, covering Jewish history. I've been taking you through Jewish history, relating it to what's going on today, in today's time, and giving you more history and more facts to give you more context about what's going on in the world today. And ancient Jewish history is very relevant to what is going on today. It's very relevant in a lot of circles. The three Abrahamic faiths all come from the same place, essentially, as the narrative. They all start with Abraham. That's why they're called the Abrahamic faiths. These religions, these three religions, are practiced, and the beliefs of these religions are held by billions of people on this planet, billions of people. So that's why we've been doing this podcast, because politically, this is very relevant. Spiritually, this is very relevant. No matter how you look at it, this is very relevant. So let's get back into it today. We're going to start today by talking about Hagar. Now, who is Hagar? You can see here on the Wikipedia page, it says, according to the book of Genesis. So she is a character in the first book of the Bible, first book of the Torah, the book of Genesis. And it says, according to the book of Genesis, Hagar is an Egyptian slave, a handmaid of Sarah, also known as Sarai. And this Sarah is Abraham's wife. When God calls Abram and Sarai out of Mesopotamia and tells them to go to the place where he's going to show them, and calls them out of the religious system. This is very important too, is that God's not only calling them out of the Mesopotamian region, but calling them out of that religious system. So it's very important to understand and know what that religious system was there in where Abram and Sarah started their journey. But God calls them out, and Abram, and who becomes Abraham's a very wealthy man, and Sarah has a slave, a handmaid, who is named Hagar. And God, when he calls Abraham and Sarah out of Mesopotamia region to this land that he's going to show them, he tells them also, this is the famous passage in Genesis 12 that the Christian Zionists, the Pastor Hagees and others quote over and over again. Even some of our congressional senators, Ted Cruz and others, have quoted the passage in Genesis 12 where God tells Abram that come out of I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless those who bless you. All the nations of the world will be blessed through you. I'm going to give you an inheritance, all of that, and I'm going to do it through your seed, through your descendant. Well, at this time, Sarah, Abraham's wife, she didn't have any children. She was barren. And so she gets the wise idea after a while that she's going to help God out. This is what it comes down to. That it's God's will. It was God's will to call Abram and Sarah out of Mesopotamia to bless them and bless his seed. God's promising that there's going to be a child from Abraham and Sarah. So, I mean, instead of just leaving it up to God, as they start getting older, she starts getting worried that she's not going to be able to have kids because she hadn't had any kids yet. So she comes up with the genius idea, Sarah, that she's going to help God out in his prophetic mission it's God's mission, but Sarah's going to help God out, going to give him a little nudge, going to help him out in this prophetic mission. And she recruits her slave, her handmaiden, Hagar, to sleep with Abraham to produce a child. And then that child is going to be the child of promise. That child was not the child of promise, but that child is Abraham's firstborn child, and his name is Ishmael. So God's promising that all of the people of the world will be blessed by Abraham and his descendants, and he promises this inheritance to Abraham's descendants. Well, Ishmael is a descendant. Ishmael is the very first offspring that Abraham has, and Abraham doesn't have Ishmael with Sarah. Abraham has Ishmael with Hagar. But the only problem is that when you go back and read in Genesis, when God makes the covenant, he doesn't only make the covenant with Abraham, he makes the covenant with Sarah. That's why he changes Sarai's name to Sarah, adding the Hev, along with Abraham, changing his name from Abram to Abraham, adding the Hev again, that the covenant was made with both Abraham and Sarah. So there was no covenant with Hagar. So Hagar does produce a child, and that child is Abraham's descendant, but that's not the child of promise. And then later on, Sarah ends up having her own child, as God had promised, who is Isaac, and that is the child of promise. It's all recorded. The beginning, it's all recorded in Genesis. It starts here in the third or in the 16th chapter of the book of Genesis. Hagar and Ishmael. Now Sarai, Abram's wife. This is even before the name. God changes their name and makes the covenant with them. So that's interesting. I just thought of that. So that Ishmael is born even before the covenant is made with Sarai and Abram, because their name here in the 16th chapter is now Sarai, and Sarai, Abram's wife, had born no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children, so go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." So Abram agreed, and he, with what Sarai said, her name wasn't Sarah yet. So Abram agreed. And after Abraham had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband. So they slept and conceived Ishmael. Now, Ishmael and Hagar, they play prominent roles in Islam. In the Quran and in the Hadith, they're spoken of. Hagar is not spoken of as Sarah's handmaid and slave. She's called Abraham's wife. Ishmael plays a very important part in Islam, because they tell the story that after Sarah had Isaac, that she begins to get jealous of Ishmael and the son that Abraham had fathered through her hand slave. So she tells, it's all, they said, this is in the Bible, but this is what Muslims believe as well. I'm not going to tell you, because this guy in this clip tells you what Muslims believe about Hagar and Ishmael. Take a listen.
Now, it seems as if Ishmael's story within the Quran begins with Abraham leaving them in some sort of barren land, which appears to be Mecca, right?
Yes, in the 14th chapter of the Quran, Abraham prays and says, "God, I have settled my descendants in a land that is not cultivated, so please you provide for them and cause the hearts of people to be inclined towards them." But he says he's leaving them there for a purpose, so that they would worship God. It's as if there is an attempt here to plant a new place of worship. I'm using a terminology here from Christian thinking in that, somebody may say, I'm planting a new church. They go to a new area where there's no church, and then by their very presence there, they're going to establish a Christian community.
So the holiest site in Islam is Mecca, and it's Mecca because of the shrine, the Kaaba, there in Mecca, where every Muslim is supposed to make this pilgrimage to go to Mecca, and they march around the Kaaba. That's what this guy's talking about, and this is what is written about in the Quran. Now, the entire Quran comes from Muhammad. The Bible comes from several different authors over spans of time, but the Quran comes from Muhammad. Muhammad's mouth alone. He says that he's dictating from this angel, and this angel's telling him what to put in the Quran. So the angel is actually the source of all of this in the Quran, which the angel represents the word of God. So God's giving the angel this word of knowledge, and then the angel dictates it to Muhammad, and he gets a new revelation, and then they put it down in the Quran. So everything in the Quran comes from Muhammad or the angel, whatever you believe. So one source for it. So this is what Muhammad writes in the Quran, and this is what Muslims believe to this day, is that Abraham took Ishmael and Hagar and took them into Saudi Arabia from Canaan and left them there. And when he left them there, Abram and Ishmael built this shrine, and that shrine is the Kaaba, which is the holiest site in Islam.
I'm using a terminology here from Christian thinking in that, somebody may say, I'm planting a new church. They go to a new area where there's no church, and then by their very presence there, they're going to establish a Christian community.
So that's what Abraham wanted to do.
A church, yes. So Abraham was planting his descendants in a barren region where people would not have come otherwise, so that in that area, God can be worshipped as well.
How does that story appear in the Bible?
In the Bible, it takes on a different coloring, in that the story goes that Ishmael was born first, and when he was about 13 years old, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to Isaac. So Isaac was the second son. When Isaac was being weaned, probably he was about 2 years old, Ishmael was laughing at him or playing with him. The term Yetzchak in Hebrew is ambiguous. It could mean either way. If it's taken to be mocking him, then this is more likely to explain Sarah's behavior, because Sarah then...
She gets jealous.
It says, drive out this slave woman and her son. I won't allow her son to inherit along with my son. And it's in response to this that Abraham then
goes to Mecca,
his wife and Hagar and her son, and leaves them in the barren area. And in fact, it is said that God told Abraham, listen to your wife, which in a way is a good commandment, listen to your wife. But in this specific circumstance, one struggles to see the morality of it. Like, how would it be right to leave this woman and her child with only a small supply of water?
So that's all recorded in the Bible, how the angel comes to Hagar when God said, it doesn't say that it's in Saudi Arabia, but it's in Mecca. But this is what Muslims believe, is that when Abraham sends Hagar, and the Bible doesn't say that Abraham went with them. He says that he gave them rations and then sent them on their way alone, and that God appeared to them. The angel appeared to Hagar and Ishmael and tells them that that he's going to make a great, and this is in the Bible, not the Quran, this is in the Bible. God tells Ishmael and Hagar that he's going to make a great nation from Ishmael as well. So you have two great nations. God tells Abram to come out of Ur, to go where he's going to make a great nation from Abraham's seed with Sarah, or Abraham's descendant from Sarah, which is Isaac. And then the angel also tells, this is in the Bible, Hagar and Ishmael, that there's going to be a great nation that comes from Ishmael as well. And you can see right here, it says, Abraham's firstborn son through Hagar, Ishmael, became the progenitor of the Ishmaelites, generally taken to be Arabs. So this is a clip that breaks down all of that real briefly. Take a listen.
The prophet Abraham was born in O, near Kufa, a city in modern-day Iraq. He left Ur for Haran and then for Palestine, making it his home. When Hagar gave birth to a son, Ismail, the prophet Abraham brought them to an uncultivated valley in Hijaz at a place called Mecca. He would visit Mecca periodically to see his wife and son. According to Islamic traditions.
So according to Islamic traditions, this is what they're saying, is that Abraham would make regular visits, leave his family and make regular visits and go into Mecca and to visit his wife Hagar and his son Ishmael. This is in the Muslims believe.
The prophet Abraham brought them to an uncultivated valley in Hijaz at a place called Mecca. He would visit Mecca periodically to see his wife and son. According to Islamic traditions, the prophet Abraham and Ismail built Kaaba together and raised its pillars.
So this is according to Islamic traditions, according to what Muslims believe and what early Muslims taught. I'm not sure if it's in the Quran, but it's in the Hadith, that Abraham and Ishmael, not Isaac, Abraham and Ishmael in Mecca, they're the ones who built the Kaaba. And like I said, the Kaaba is the shrine, the idol. So hilarious. These Muslims for centuries have been so against idol worship and called anything idol. The whole iconoclasm controversy that separated the church was all about, just painting pictures of Jesus. That was, that's an idol, but they march around this idol. This is an idol. The Ben is an idol. Anyway, so they believe that Abraham and Ishmael built this shrine. Now, who is Allah? If you know the story of Abraham or Muhammad, born in Mecca, there was a pantheon of gods worship at Mecca where the Kaaba is, and this is the Kaaba right here. This is the Kaaba. This is where they go on Hajj every year, and they march around this idol. So they believe that Ishmael and Abraham believed this. This is the story that they tell. But when Muhammad was first born, he first gets his first revelations from this angel. There's a pantheon of gods that are worshipped at this spot in Mecca. And then Muhammad starts preaching in Mecca. The people, they reject him because he's preaching this new form of monotheism. It's not Christianity. It's not Judaism. This is new form of monotheism. And they worship many gods there. It was a polytheistic shrine to worship. So because he was causing trouble, they kick Muhammad out of Mecca. And then that's when he goes to Medina and he becomes the prophet in Medina. That's when he really starts to build the Islamic religion in Medina. And then then he builds this army and they come back from Medina into Mecca and they destroy all those people who had driven him out of Mecca. They go to the Kaaba and then they create this shrine. It wasn't Abraham and Ishmael that created this. Muhammad created this with his army in the 7th century. And there were many gods that were worshipped there, but the God that he chose, one God, and Allah from the many gods, and Allah became the God that Muslims worship. And Allah is a very different God from Yahweh. Allah is actually Baal. Hubal was one of the gods that were worshipped there at the place where the Kaaba, when Muhammad came in and chose a god, and he chose Hubal. I want you to read this Wikipedia page. It says Hubal, in Arabian mythology, Hubal was a god worshipped in pre-Islamic Arabia, notably by the Quraysh at the Kaaba. They were worshipped there at the Kaaba. In Mecca, the god's icon was a human figure believed to control acts of deviation, which was performed by tossing arrows, or not deviation. What is that? Divination. I don't know what that is. Which was performed by tossing arrows before the statue. So anyway, you read down here, etymology. Where does the etymology of Hubal come from? The name Hubal may be ultimately a derivative of the name Baal from the Canaanite pantheon. So Hubal came from Baal. Now, Abram and Abraham was in Canaan. That's where Abram and Sarah, and they were all in Canaan. And now Muslims believe that that Abraham and Isaac, that's what they tell them, their people. I mean, that Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba, but we know that the Kaaba, from history, that the Kaaba was erected. Well, it was already there, but it didn't look like this. This shrine, this idol, was made by Muhammad and his armies. But anyway, so Hubal is Allah and Hubal is Baal. All right. So there's a sect of Muslims that know this, but the majority of Muslims don't know this. And that's very important to understand. So Muslims worship Baal, essentially. When we were talking about Manasseh in the last podcast and the reason that Solomon's temple was destroyed, we talked about Manasseh setting up idols to Baal and Asherah in the temple. It says right here, according to Kings, Manasseh, he restored polytheistic worship in Jerusalem. This is a Jewish king, a descendant of David, of King David, son of Hezekiah. Manasseh restored polytheistic worship of Baal and Asherah in the temple, and sponsored the Assyrian astral cult through Judah. So zealous was he in his worship of foreign gods, he is said to have participated in sacrificial cult of Moloch. So Manasseh worshiped Moloch. He brought statues to Baal. He brought Asherah poles. What's an Asherah pole? This is one of the Mesopotamian gods. Now think about this. When God calls Abraham out of Mesopotamia, it was to call him out of that religious system and to bring him into a completely different religious system that was separated from this polytheism. And then you have this going on in Israel, in Judea, where you have Jews that are practicing, Baal worship, Moloch worship, setting up Asherah poles. What's the Asherah pole? Asherah pole is a tree that stood near Canaanite religious locations. It's basically an obelisk. This is the Asherah pole is an obelisk. So basically you can associate obelisks with occult polytheism. So there was Jews back in the time of Manasseh who worshiped Baal. He wasn't the only one that worshiped Baal. When Josiah comes on the scene, we talked about Josiah in the last podcast, where he has to clean up everything that Manasseh had done and rededicate the temple and all that stuff. He under Josiah, they kill a lot of the priests to Baal. They kill the witches and sorcerers and all that stuff. So if you're able to make it through that and you're a Baal worship, then you go underground. You don't practice it in public anymore. You practice it in private. That is the essence of what a cult means. A cult means secret. That's so if you were a worship of Moloch and Baal and all of that stuff that is forbidden, when Josiah comes in and starts to implement, the worship of Yahweh and recommitting to the covenant again, then you go underground. Basically, all of the people who worship Baal, but they don't go away. And there were a lot of Jews that worship Baal from the beginning, even during the first Zionist movement. I was telling you, as Moses is leading the children of Israel from Egypt after the Exodus through the wilderness, that many of them start worshiping Baal. It's in the book of Deuteronomy, and God kills a bunch of them because they were worshiping Baal. So Baal worship is part of Islamic religion. So that's who Allah is, basically Hubal and Baal. In Judaism, there were Jews throughout the history of the Jewish people who worship Baal. Not all of them, but there were a small sect. Not all people in Islam know that they're worshiping Baal. There's a small group. There's a small group of Jews who, to this day, worship Baal. Absolutely. And even in Christianity, there are some Christians who worship Baal. Why is there an obelisk in the middle of St. Peter's Basilica with the dome? What is this about? Yeah, it has a cross on the top. But what is this? Why is there an Asherah pole in the middle of St. Peter's Basilica? That there are people in the church that operate in the church that you believe are Christians, not only in Catholicism, also in evangelical. You'd be surprised how many evangelical pastors are in the occult and Freemasonry and all that stuff. There's a lot. So it's not only the Catholic Church, it's throughout all Christianity, it's throughout all of Judaism, or not all of Judaism, but there are sects of Judaism that practice the occult, that practice Baal worship and polytheism to this day, mysticism, all that stuff in Islam. So in the last podcast, I was making the case, and the podcast before that there are religious fanatics, religious fundamentalists, and religious zealots in Christianity, Islam, and in Judaism. All of the Abrahamic faiths have a sect of, and the size of the sect within each of the faiths could vary. I believe there's more fanatics and zealots in Islam just because of the nature of their religion, but you have religious fanatics and zealots and fundamentalists in all three of the Abrahamic faiths. But you also have a very powerful, very secret, that's what a cult means, secret, religion that people don't understand, called the mystic religion, the religion of the occult, the Baal worship, the Moloch worship, the worship of celestial constellations and stuff of that nature. The occult, basically. And they're religious zealots, fundamentalists, and fanatics that are part of that religious system as well. And the thing is, because of the nature of it being hidden, is what the occult means, that you can have people that are in the Catholic Church and that you see, wearing the clothes of a priest or a cardinal, or a nice suit on your MAGA church pastor who's you go to those churches every Sunday and not know that secretly that these people are in the occult. Same thing in the Jewish religion. Same thing with Jews. That you may have Jews that may seem like they are secular Jews and not religious at all. Maybe they are pretend to be Reformed Jews or whatever, but they're into some dark stuff. They're into some Jewish mysticism. They're into some Baal worship and some other occult things. Same thing with Islam. So I just wanted to make that clear. I think that's very important. And have a clip here. Listen to Father Ripperger in the last podcast, and he's an exorcist. He just did a podcast interviewed by Sean Ryan, and why don't you listen to what he says here? He says that he's done tons of exorcisms where he's talked to demons, and he talks about the fact that these demons know things that it would be impossible for the host that they are possessing to know. So he knows that he's talking to a supernatural entity, and I want you to listen to what he says that these demons have told him in these sessions. Take a listen.
The Father Amorth, who was the head exorcist in Rome for like 40 years, he complained about this very problem that had been going on since he was just starting being an exorcist. We also get a sense too of like how these guys get inducted to that type of stuff. It starts to come out, in the
I just realized that must be the part that they cut out, because in the beginning, Sean Ryan says that because of YouTube, they had to cut a portion of the interview out because, and he has it on his Patreon, but I just realized that's where it cuts.
To have a fairly good complexion. By the way,
anyway, I'm going to stop here before you play. I went back and I watched this 4-hour interview, this entire interview, and it is fascinating. I highly recommend going and watching this entire interview that Sean Ryan does with this father.
The first guy that this has happened to, the Father Amorth, who was the head exorcist in Rome for like 40 years, he complained about this very problem that had been going on since he was just starting being an exorcist. We also get a sense too of like how these guys get inducted to that type of stuff. It starts to come out, in the sessions. The demons have talked about how these, and it's not stuff that I've ever asked. It's the demons are compelled sometimes by our Lord to talk about this stuff. So there's times like this one case that I'm working on right now. When I'm saying Mass, which we start the sessions with, very often what will happen is during the Mass, the demon will manifest. And that tells me that God has told him he's had to tell me something. And so during the session, something will come out. And very often it revolves around this stuff that's happened. But I've had more than one case talk about this stuff that's going on in the church, that it's spiritual, that it's leadership, not all of it, but some of its leadership is very morally compromised, and some of it is involved in stuff that's very dark.
So what he's saying is that when he's in these sessions, and he goes on to say that other exorcists that he, collaborates with and talks to have told him the exact same thing happens in their sessions as well. They're having these sessions and with these, these exorcists and they are, having conversations with demons that will mention the names. It goes further into it. I do recommend watching the entire interview. Mention the names of high-ranking officials in the Catholic Church that are into dark stuff, that are into the occult, that are practicing witchcraft and all this other stuff. He says it doesn't go all the way to the top, but high-ranking. He's talking about the courier. And honestly, if you know anything about, why did Benedict have to resign, people? Benedict didn't die as Pope. He resigns and then comes in the first Jesuit, that kind of calmed things down. But what was going on during, the papacy of Benedict in the church? We know what the courier was doing. We know what even some of the this very, according to Father here, immoral stuff that is going on in the church. And again, it's not just the Catholic Church, that I'm telling you that the occult and these occultists and people that are into some dark, immoral stuff are in the Catholic Church, they're in the Protestant Church, they're in Judaism, they're in Islam, and they are as fanatical, as zealous, as I guess as fundamental as they can be to their occult practices. I guess it's pretty fundamental if you understand this stuff. But that's going on, and that's what he says here. Let's listen to this again.
It's like this one case that I'm working on right now. When I'm saying Mass, which we start the sessions with, very often what will happen is during the Mass, the demon will manifest. And that tells me that God has told him he's had to tell me something. And so during the session, something will come out. And very often it revolves around this stuff that's happened. But I've had more than one case talk about this stuff that's going on in the church, that it's spiritual, that it's leadership, not all of it, but some of its leadership is very morally compromised, and some of it is involved in stuff that's very dark. There is a book that was just recently put out by a woman who ended up getting inducted into being a victim of satanic ritual abuse through deception. I think that some of these guys can also get, but there's, like I said, there comes a certain point where it gets revealed what's going on. And so these guys have to either cut bait or they're going to sign off on it, one of the two. But a lot of these guys went into the priesthood already on the other team.
I thought that was very interesting that he says that a lot of these guys, they went into the priesthood already on the other team. They went into the priesthood already on the other team. That's what he says. So anyway, we listened to Father Rappinger in the last podcast talk about the temple, and he said what Tucker Carlson had said that talked about Julian the apostate trying to rebuild the temple in the 4th century because Julian wanted to turn the empire back to a pagan polytheistic empire, and he didn't like Christianity and the fact that Christianity had taken over the empire. His uncle, Constantine the Great, had made the empire a Christian empire, and he actually did try to rebuild I've looked into more of this since the last podcast, and he did try to rebuild the temple, and something supernatural. Many sources. They're not just one or two sources on this. I can't believe that I'd never heard of the fact that Julian tried to rebuild the temple, but there's a plethora of Christian sources, of non-Christian sources that talks about him trying to rebuild the temple on Temple Mount, and there being earthquakes and other supernatural reasons that he was unable to rebuild the temple. But Father Rappinger says that, he believes that the temple is never going to be rebuilt because that's what church fathers say. I don't know that I believe that. I believe that there's some people that really want the temple to be built, and the temple being rebuilt, the third temple being rebuilt, just like Solomon's temple is very, very important in esoteric circles, in the occult, in Freemasonry. It's all about Solomon's temple, and it has and Solomon's temple has this has this prevalence in the occult circles. But I believe that the third temple is going to be the same, just like Solomon's temple as well. It's going to have strong esoteric significance when it is built. So I do believe it's built. But what Father says here in this interview, not in this clip, because I ain't play any more clips from him. I have a lot of other stuff that I want to show you guys. But he says that that the church, like I said in the last podcast, the church is actually the temple. That's what he says, and he's talking about that. That Daniel, in the book of Daniel talks about the abomination of desolation happening in the temple. And Jesus actually, in the Gospels, quotes Daniel. We've read it before where Jesus says, where Daniel the prophet talked, when you see, this is Jesus giving this is when Jesus' disciples come to him and ask him when the end times are going to happen and all this stuff. And Jesus tells them, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then then the second coming is near, that the end times are near when you see the abomination of desolation. Well, what is the abomination of desolations? Well, after Daniel, we've talked about this. This is what the whole Maccabees story is about Antiochus Epiphanes going into the temple, desecrating the temple, desecrating the holy place. That's exactly what Jesus says. He says the holy place. That when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel and forget what Jesus says, essentially going to be the Antichrist, going into the holy place and creating the abomination of desolations in the holy place. Well, what Father says here is that the temple's not going to be rebuilt and that the church is the new temple. So the new holy place is the church, that the abomination, I wish I had that clip prepped when he says this. Let's find it. That the new holy place is going to be sorry about that, guys. That the new holy place is not the temple, it's the church, because the church is the new temple. And according to scripture, I told you that in the last podcast, that the church we are the new temple. We're the third temple.
I think that when you're talking about the higher levels, I don't think you're able to get that high without being groomed to get to that height at this stage.
Let's see.
What about the temple?
According to the fathers of the church, at least the ones that I've read, they said the temple will never be rebuilt. And it will never be rebuilt. And the reason being is because, first of all, Julian the Apostate tried to rebuild it, and it was destroyed in the process. Christ actually put an end to the Jewish sacrifice on purpose, because the Jewish sacrifice in the Old Testament was a lead-up or a prefigurement of Christ. And so he gave them one generation in order for them to convert to Christianity. And when they didn't, he put an end to their sacrifice. So technically speaking, there hasn't been practicing Jews in 2,000 years because the temple hasn't been around. They haven't been able to offer sacrifice. Doesn't mean that they don't pray and things of that sort, but they haven't been able to enact.
Anyway, it's not going to show it in this clip, but he says that. He actually says that the new temple is the church. That's what scripture says. That's the replacement theology, that the church replaced the temple, not the Jews. Church didn't replace the Jews. The church replaced the temple. So the abomination of desolation is what he says, if you interpret it right, is the abomination of the church, is the abomination of the church, is what he says. It makes sense to me. Anyway, we were talking about the Maccabean revolt. We don't have very much time left. Of course, we're going to pick this back up on Monday in the last podcast. And we're talking about the Maccabean revolt being the first revolt in the second temple period, where the Jews, it started with a civil war between very religious Jews, the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, who lived in the rural outskirts areas from Jerusalem, and then the Hellenistic Jews in Jerusalem, the more polytheistic, secular Jews, the Jews that would worship other gods besides the God of their forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were a little bit lax with their practice of Judaism, and the civil war was going on for the position of high priest. And then the Seleucids, Antiochus Epiphanes, he chooses sides in that civil war between these Jews, and that's what launched the Maccabean revolt. Something interesting that you should know about the Maccabean revolt: when the Hasmoneans are able to defeat the Seleucids and able to establish this 100-year period of a semi-autonomous empire, and start using the name king. And again, you get into the second generation, or the generation after Judah and his brothers, the Hasmoneans become very Hellenistic. They become and adopt secularism and Greek Hellenism, and as fervently as even the people that their ancestors had won the Maccabean revolt against. It's not like the Jews there in Jerusalem and Judea, depart after the Maccabean revolt and the establishment of the Hasmonean dynasty. It doesn't mean that the Jews become less Hellenistic and secular. In many ways, they become more. And so when Jesus is born, the entire priesthood is corrupted. They're continuing to revolt over and over again. Again, that's why the practical reason that the second temple was destroyed. And when Titus Vespasian rolls in 70 AD, is because they continue to revolt over and over again, all the way until even 70 years after the second temple is destroyed, and they're more secular. That's why Jesus drives out the money changer at the temple, because they're materialistic. They are not spiritual at all. I mean, all that stuff. The high priest, even going back to the last prophet, Malachi, when he's condemning them about the sacrifices that they're bringing to the temple, that they are an offense to God and all that stuff. So anyway, going back to what I was saying about them revolting over and over again. And I started thinking about this and what Ben Shapiro says in this interview that he did with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan show. He went viral for saying this. And I want to break this down for you a little bit. I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to do this and then we'll wrap it up and then we'll get back into this on Monday. But listen to what Ben Shapiro says here.
You know, from a Jewish point of view, where we don't believe in the divinity of Christ, I think that there you can make an argument that the Gospels, which were written,
he was just a prophet, and
No, we don't even believe he was a prophet.
He wasn't a prophet.
What do you guys think?
What do I think he was historically? I think he was a Jew who tried to lead a revolt against the Romans and got killed for his trouble, just like a lot of other Jews.
That Jesus tried to lead a revolt against the Romans and then got killed for his troubles, which is absolutely ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous for Ben Shapiro to say something like this, because what Jesus did was quite the opposite. If Jesus would have done what Ben Shapiro is saying here, they would have all said that he was the Messiah. And the reason you have to understand is because Jews understand that when the Messiah comes, that the Messiah is going to destroy all of their enemies, and the Messiah is going to establish the greater Israel territory. That the Messiah, that they're not the ones that are going to do this. That the Messiah is the one that's going to do this. And when the Messiah comes, the Messiah is going to come as a warrior and destroy. I told you in the last podcast, this is why Judas betrayed Jesus, because he understood Jesus was the Messiah. He just wanted to force Jesus to take down the Romans. So, and that's what they believe. They believe that the Messiah, when the Messiah comes, the Messiah is going to take down the Romans and take down whoever the enemies are of the Jews. This is something very strongly even believed to this day. So it's crazy that Ben Shapiro would say this, that Jesus tried to lead a revolt against the Romans and got killed for his trouble. Because if Jesus would have tried to lead a revolt against the Romans, first of all, he would have been successful. And second of all, all the Jews would have seen him as the Messiah, because they believe that the Messiah is going to come and destroy all of their enemies. But like I told you in the last podcast, when Jesus is brought before Pilate didn't even want to crucify him. He didn't even want to kill him. And this is all you can see in the 27th chapter of the book of Matthew. Read a little bit of this. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, this is talking about, I don't know, this is not Pilate yet. This is still Caiaphas. Anyway, you have said so. So no, this is Pilate. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" This is Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus says, "You have said so." When he was accused by the chief priests and elders, these are Jews, he was accused by the chief priests and elders. He gave no answer. And Pilate asked him, "Do you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not a single charge. Let's get down here to the 15th. Now, It was at the governor's custom. This is Pilate. So it was Pilate's custom, and the governor's, whoever the Roman governor. It was the custom of the Roman governor at the festival, the Passover festival, to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner named Jesus Barabbas, and Jesus is Yeshua. It derives from Joshua, very popular name at this time. So at that time, they had a well-known prisoner, Jesus Barabbas. What was Barabbas in jail for? Again, leading a revolt. Same thing that Ben Shapiro said that Jesus tried to do. He tried to lead a revolt. Jesus didn't try to lead a revolt. Barabbas was the one who led the revolt, and that's why Barabbas was in jail. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, which one of the prisoners should I release? Should I release Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah? Should I release the Messiah or should I release Barabbas? For he knew it was out of self-interest. This is Pilate. Pilate knew what they were doing the whole time. For Pilate knew it was out of self-interest that they had brought Jesus to him. While Pilate was sitting in a judge seat, his wife sent him this message. Don't have anything to do with this innocent man. His wife told him, don't have anything to do with this innocent man, because she had a dream. For I've suffered a great deal today from a dream. Pilate's wife had a dream, says, don't have anything to do with this innocent man. But the chief priests, who's this? This is the Sanhedrin. This is the Pharisees. This is the Sadducees. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd. Now think about this. Jesus comes in the day before on the colt. The whole crowd is saying, Hosanna, the King of the Jews. The chief priests and the elders get angry at the people in the crowd. And so when Pilate, the next day after he's arrested, Pilate says, I'm going to release either Barabbas, who tried to lead the revolt against the Romans, or I'm going to release Jesus to you. The chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. So it was the chief priests and the elders who went around, who have influence over the people and the crowd, political influence and spiritual influence at this time, the chief priests and the elders. So they went around, influenced the people to yell for Barabbas, release Barabbas, who was actually leading the revolt against the Romans. And Jesus was executed. And they answered, give us Barabbas. What about Jesus? Crucify him. This is what they said. So Ben Shapiro is absolutely wrong. Jesus did not try to lead a revolt against the Romans, but going all the way back to the Maccabean revolt, the first revolt, over the next 300 years, many revolts were led against the Romans. Revolt after revolt after revolt. But Jesus was not one of them. Barabbas was, and many others. But what I'm trying to get you to understand is that if Jesus would have had initiated a revolt against the Romans, they would have identified him as Messiah, because they believe that Messiah is going to destroy. When Messiah comes, Messiah is going to destroy all of their enemies, everybody. Very important that you understand that, because we're going to get back into this in the next podcast. This is going to continue. We're going to pick up on this in the next podcast. But Simon Bar-Kokhba, this is the leader of the final revolt. Like I told you, that the revolts started with the Maccabees revolting against the Seleucids. The final revolt in Judea under the Romans was the revolt of Simon Bar-Kokhba. And it's known as the Bar-Kokhba revolt. And this revolt happens 70 years after Titus had destroyed the temple. And you can see here, some of the rabbinic scholars in his time believed him to be the long expected Messiah. That they believed that Bar-Kokhba was Messiah. Why did they believe Bar-Kokhba was Messiah? Because he was leading a revolt against the Romans. Because that's what they believed. The reason Jesus couldn't be the Messiah is because Jesus didn't lead the revolt. Jesus didn't try to destroy all their enemies. But the Messiah, as they're still expecting him to this day, and this is what the temple is going to be for. They're expecting the Messiah to destroy all of their enemies. All of their enemies. So we were asking the question, should Christians be longing for, contributing to, the rebuilding of the third temple? Is it a Christian, is this part of the mission that Jesus gave us, is to give money to organizations and to do things to help usher in the rebuilding of the third temple? Well, the third temple has already been built. We're living in the period of the third temple. The third temple is the church. So if there is another temple built on Temple Mount, it won't be the third temple. It would be the fourth temple. And is it Christian? Should it be a Christian mission? Should it be a Christian endeavor? Should Christians give? Should Christians support the rebuilding of the temple on Temple Mount, the fourth temple? Well, this is a question that Tucker Carlson asked in the monologue that he did last week that we've been listening to and commenting on over the past couple of podcasts. And this is a question he asked, and I want you to take a listen to this segment here. We're almost done for today.
But it's not just Hasidic groups from Brooklyn, and it's not just IDF soldiers. There are amazingly a lot of American evangelical leaders, Christian Zionists, whose main point is rebuilding the third temple. Now, how could an American Christian or any Christian call for the building of a temple whose inherent presence denies Christ? Who said clearly, and Christians believe this, it's a core point of faith, I am the temple. You want to speak to God, you speak through me. That's Christianity. That's the whole religion right there. So if you're a Christian preacher calling for the rebuilding of the third temple, you kind of missed the whole point. That's more than apostasy. That's like not even knowing what the religion's about. So it's hard to believe there could be any ordained Christian leaders pushing for the rebuilding of the third temple. Oh, but there are a lot.
There are a lot.
And here's just one. This is Pastor Greg Locke. Listen to this.
The Gaza Strip, which has now been cut off by Israel, and rightly so. They should have cut them off a long time ago. I don't care how insensitive you think I am to that. There's 6 doors in this church. You can leave anytime you want to. They've cut them off, electricity. They've cut off their water. They should have. Now, listen, I'm not for hurting anyone that's innocent. But anybody that supports terrorism is not innocent. You understand that? Israel should make the Gaza Strip a parking lot by this time next week. Destroy the whole thing. What they ought to do is evacuate up there on the hill and get a great big missile and blow that wicked Dome of the Rock plumb off of the spot where it's standing right now, so we can get that third temple rebuilt and usher in the coming of Jesus.
So we can get that third temple built and usher in the coming of Jesus. Third temple's already built. Jesus said that on this rock, I will build my temple. And there's sacrifices too. There's sacrifices. This is what Paul says. Living sacrifices. I beseech you to present your body as a living sacrifice. There's a temple. There's sacrifices going on right now. So the temple you're talking about is the fourth temple. And the question is, should Christians support, contribute to, long for, await the Dome of the Rock being destroyed and another temple being built? I'm not going to tell you the answer to that question. I'm just going to give you information over the next podcast and maybe the podcast after that to see if you can come up with your own conclusion of that answer. Come up with your own answer to that question of if a Christian, according to the scripture, we're going to get into a lot of scripture. Should a Christian support a building of a new temple? We're going to talk about that in the next podcast. I have a little bit more time left. I guess I will play this clip. Maybe. Should I play this? Yeah, I'll play it, and then we'll probably watch it again in the next podcast. But it's very important that you understand what the temple is and what it's about. What's the purpose of the temple? And this clip goes into that. This will be the last clip of the day. Take a listen.
2 Chronicles 3:1 tells us that all 3 of these places are one and the same. The place where Abraham built his altar on Mount Moriah is the same place that King David later builds his altar on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite.
So this is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem that he's talking about, and it's the exact same spot where Abraham offered up Isaac. Muslims believe it was Ishmael. Muslims believe that Abraham brought Ishmael to this spot where Temple Mount is and was about to offer Ishmael up as a sacrifice. In the Bible and in Jewish scriptures, it says that it was Isaac. But this very spot is where Abraham did that, performed that sacrifice. That there's actually a lamb that replaces Isaac, and that sacrifice happens here. And then David also offers a sacrifice here, and then David purchases this land for the temple. Sacrifice. This is all about sacrifice. That's what the temple is about. That's what the temple is for sacrifice. So if you're a Christian that is supporting the rebuilding of the temple, then you're supporting new sacrifices.
King David later builds his altar on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, which is also the place that Solomon builds the temple, which also has a sacrificial altar. And so the top of Mount Moriah is a very sacred place, and the theme that holds all these building projects together is as a place of sacrifice. So earlier in 2 Chronicles 2:6, we're given the purpose of the temple, where Solomon says that the temple was a place to burn sacrifices before God. I thought this would be something interesting to get the perspective of a rabbi on. So I sat down with Rabbi Ken Spiro to ask him about the purpose of the temple and the sacrificial system. Leviticus 17:11 says, "For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life." What about, like, for example, Leviticus 17:11, where it says that it's for atonement, that the life of the animal is in the blood, and that it's
that's
for
part
atonement?
of this. It's part of this idea. Again, it's not the notion of God's happy now, he's got his meat, but rather it's my recognition that I've done something that damages the world. This animal this should be me. This should be me. It's seeing a life taken even of a living being. I would say the temple's a tool to achieve atonement.
And obviously that has a lot to do with animal sacrifice. I mean, thousands and thousands of animals were sacrificed in the temple system. Sure. And does the shedding of the blood of these animals, does that have to do with atonement, with forgiveness of sins?
Well, again, that's a very interesting topic. The word for sacrifice in Hebrew is korban, which comes from the word karev, which means to bring closer.
Here's how korban works. When the blood of an animal is applied to your sin, then God forgives you. This removes the sin that separates you from God, allowing you to draw close to Him.
So it's all about communion. What you see happening here,
the sin that separates you from God.
It's communion. This is what communion actually is. The communion of God and man, that it is sin separating God from man. So you have to have a sacrifice so God and man can have communion. That's what it's all about. If you are longing for another temple, for sacrifices, for communion, then you don't understand Christianity. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just going to give you more information to come up with your own conclusion to answer the question, should Christians support a third temple? And we'll get back into this in the next podcast. Hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday.